Hello and welcome to the simulation! I am your host, Alan Sakian. Thank you so much for coming out for this evening of thought-provoking conversation. AI, genetic engineering, colonizing Mars, neural prosthetics. We will be talking about it all tonight with our guest for the evening. And before introducing him, I want to thank our epic facility, our venue for the evening. It is the Factory. Is it incredible or what? Yeah. I want to thank our beer sponsor, Black Hammer Brewing. Have you guys been enjoying that? Yeah. Good stuff. And Wild Pepper, our food sponsor, enjoying that as well? Yeah. Good. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. So we're live streaming this. So if you have friends that want to hear about this conversation that are unable to tune in live, please go to the Simulation Facebook page and just share that to them. It's also being streamed on my page as well, Alan Sakian. So, just a little bit of background. This idea is to put global leaders with humanity's most thought-provoking questions onto the same stage. We hope to inspire people to build the future of civilization. That sound fun? Yeah. Yeah. All right. You're like, yeah, all the time, yeah, Callie. So check this. Our goal, and with your support, we will actually get there. Everyone says it's such an audacious goal. Our goal is to, by 2019, after the Super Bowl, we want to rent Levi's Stadium out, and we want to put 50,000 scientists and engineers and designers in the audience, and we want to have Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and other global leaders discussing these questions. Does that sound like a good goal? Hell yeah! All right, cool. So with your help, we're going to get there. And without further ado, I will introduce to you our guest for the evening, Dr. Aubrey de Grey! Hello,
Evening.
Aubrey. Yes.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Aubrey, it is very nice to have you. And Aubrey was the first person to introduce me to how everyone is in a Pro Aging Trance. Are you guys familiar with that? Go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead. Tell us what the Pro Aging Trance. Actually, first of all, tell me, do I need to use this microphone since I have this microphone?
Yes, because
okay.
Because this is amplification here, and then the lab will record for
Gotcha.
production. So, look around you. Everyone thinks that death is inevitable. Is it true?
No.
Hopefully not.
Maybe.
Death, no, hopefully not, maybe.
What's death?
What is death? What happens? What is life? So, it's not inevitable. And I'm very inspired by people like Aubrey that very quickly teach people about getting out of this pro-aging trance, that we can live forever.
Yeah, okay, that wasn't very good. So
okay, let me change one part of it. Do you like cancer?
No.
Do you like Alzheimer's? No. Do you like people dying in your family? No. All right, so go ahead.
Better. All right, so all right, so the term pro-aging trance, which I coined a long time ago now, is basically the psychological state in which one defends the concept of aging for completely irrational reasons. Like, for example, saying, oh, well, you know, the diseases of old age are obviously bad, but there's this other thing called aging itself that is fine and a good thing, and it was a blessing in disguise and all that. Or, you know, where would we put all the people, or wouldn't dictators live forever if we didn't have aging, things like that. You know, this is what I call the pro-aging trance, and the reason I call it that is because I have had the fortune to see people who are in an actual trance, who've been hypnotized, and who are caused to believe something that isn't true, and to justify it, to explain it.
And could we also potentially make this analogous to flight? Pre-1900.
I'll come to that.
Yeah, cool.
So the thing about people who are hypnotized and told to believe something that isn't true and then asked to explain it is they can. They're very, very good at it, or at least they think they are. They give utterly unhesitating, fluent, lucid explanations for the idiotic thing that they have been caused to believe, and they have no idea that what they're saying is idiotic. Absolutely none. I was first exposed to this, in fact, I think the only time I've really been exposed to it firsthand was when I was in my early 20s as an undergraduate in Cambridge in England, and it stayed with me. It was very powerful. And when I started to converse with people about their attitudes towards aging, I was very forcefully reminded of this. So that's where the phrase came from. Now, you mentioned powered flight. So this is an interesting concept.
We can't get to Mars. We can't get to even the moon. We can't understand quantum mechanics. I mean, it goes on and on.
So this is sometimes a little oversimplified. You cannot go out and say, well, look, people have been over-pessimistic about this or that technological challenge in the past, therefore we're obviously over-pessimistic about the defeatability of aging. You know, that's not fair. You can't say that. You can equally say the opposite. What you can say is we can't be sure. You can certainly say people were over-pessimistic about powered flight. People as late as 1900 or later were saying that it was theoretically impossible, right up until the Wright brothers did it. But equally, rather smart people like Leonardo da Vinci, 400 years earlier, were saying that we were quite close. And they were wrong too, in the opposite direction. So we can't be sure, right? But we don't need to be sure in order to justify really trying really hard. Because even if we have a small chance of actually succeeding with what we know today in hastening the defeat of our biggest problem, the thing that causes the most suffering in the world, we damn well ought to be going for that chance.
Yes. Let's do by round of applause. Who wants to live forever? All right, who does not want to live forever?
All right, who thinks that the question of how long you want to live is a fucked up, stupid question?
So rephrase that.
Who's pro-choice?
Great. The reason I say it's a fucked up, stupid question is very straightforward to explain. Hands up anyone who has an opinion about what time they want to go to the toilet next Monday. There you go. Now, there's no reason why you don't have an opinion. And you might have an opinion about what time you expect to go to the toilet because of habit, right? That's different. Well, I'm saying about what time you want to go to the toilet. Who would have an opinion about that? I mean, that's completely crazy, right? And the reason it's crazy, we all know the reason why it's crazy to have an opinion about that. Namely, that we're going to have better information on the topic nearer the time, right? And we're going to be able to act on that better information, right? So what's the point of knowing now, of thinking about it now, right? It's exactly the same. I haven't the faintest idea whether I want to live to 100, but I don't need to know.
Really?
I just need to.
I do. I do want to live to 100. I want to live till 150.
How do you know?
Because I want to see humanity get further. I want to see us progress.
How do you know we're going to progress?
Because of people that care about building the future and building a great world. And I think that love and that increase in consciousness is slowly going to overcome hatred and suffering and those things.
And you might be right, and you might be wrong. But the point is that I agree with you, but we might be wrong. We might be wrong.
I want to see us get to the next orbiting rocks. I want to see us get to the next star systems.
Yeah, right. But the point is, but the point is, if you don't have an opinion, it's still fine because you can just have an opinion about wanting to carry on having a lot of choice. That's what I have, right? I just don't want my option about whether to live to 100 or 1,000 to be progressively taken away from me by my declining health.
Yeah.
Now, that's a bleeding obvious thing, right?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So whether you know now or not that you want to live forever, live till you're 150, you just don't want it to be taken away from you.
You don't want the choice taken away, that's right.
The choice taken away to live. Good. Okay, this is a good start. Now, we have a bowl of questions. They're written on index cards. They're the ones that Aubrey picked for today from the list. It's simulationseries.com/the-list if you want to see the list of all 100 of these thought-provoking questions. And they will be iterated on over time. If you guys want to submit answers to questions, you're welcome to. If you want to submit questions, you're welcome to. So we're going to start it off by having Aubrey just pick where we will start. And read it off, Aubrey.
Well, this is an interesting place to start. Do you believe that love is harder than rocket science? Now, first thing you've got to remember is that I chose the question. I didn't write the question. Right. I had to choose a respectable number from the list that Alan wrote. I actually did complain at the first iteration. I said, look, fucking hell. But I fixed that. Most of my problem with the first iteration was that the questions were all of the form, or most of them were of the form, do you believe in this or that? Which I didn't think much of. But at least the current round of questions are, do you believe something or whatever? Okay, so do I believe that love is harder than rocket science? Well, I've certainly made a lot of mistakes when it comes to my personal life. Then again, I've also made a lot of non-mistakes, and I've ended up in a pretty good position overall. I've never tried rocket science, so I can't honestly say how hard it is. But on the whole, I believe that the work I do and the work I used to do in artificial intelligence is probably about as hard as rocket science, and I didn't make so many mistakes in those areas. So yeah, I would go for the answer yes.
I love it. All right, what do you guys think? Is love harder than rocket science? Round of applause. All right, and how about for those that think that rocket science is harder than love?
I want to know the gender ratio on that one.
Or how many of them are in relationships. Okay, cool. So without even me providing thoughts about it, just how hard, I don't know. I don't even know where to take my thoughts on this. So we'll
one thing. I mean, about the gender thing. One thing. I mean, of course, I'm being decidedly flippant here, but the fact is, sometimes I have to be just in order not to cry when I get asked stupid questions. And one of the questions I often get asked that I find particularly stupid is, why do you want to live forever? Because the fact is, longevity is a side effect of what we actually work on and what I actually care about, namely health, right? So it's a ridiculous question, and I've been telling people it's a ridiculous question for a very, very long time, so it's a bit frustrating that people don't get it.
Think about how many times you'll be able to get married if you live until
hang on. So when I'm feeling particularly flippant, what I say is, well, look, it takes the best part of a currently normal lifetime for a guy to figure out what women like and dislike about men. So if I live 1,000 years, then maybe I've got a shot at figuring out what women like and dislike about each other. But as I say, we're being flippant.
Within love, what I find interesting is that humans are the first species to celebrate lifelong monogamy with a wedding type celebration. I don't know, I've never seen monkeys or other species throw the massive weddings. So anyway, is it harder than rocket science? He'll be, remember, a lot of these answers to these questions are not binary yes or no. They're discourse that we have. And so let's move on to the next question. And for this one, we will take the bucket into our audience, and you will get to pick our next question. And go ahead and read it out loud for us.
Do you believe we are alone in the cosmos?
That was, do you believe we are alone in the cosmos?
So I'm going to slightly cheat here, because I happen to know there's another question in the bucket that says something like, do you believe we are in a simulation? And I don't have the faintest idea whether we're in a simulation. There are various good arguments that say that we almost certainly are, and various other good arguments that say we almost certainly are not, and I'm not really sure which one to believe. However, what I can certainly say is that the answer to that question very much determines my answer to the question, are we alone in the cosmos? If we're not in a simulation, then we're almost certainly not alone in the cosmos. But if we are in a simulation, then we could perfectly well be alone because there's... Right.
Aubrey, do you do stand-up?
Only on TV.
We should get an Aubrey on stand-up in a Comedy Central special.
I did, however, make Colbert laugh when I was on Colbert in 2008. Yeah, I told him, he said something like, well, how are we going to, we're not going to want to cross the street, are we? We're going to feel that we're risking so many years of life if we, take any risks, right? And I said, no, it's going to be fine. Your grandmother's going to be able to help you across the street because your grandmother's still going to be healthy. And he actually thought that was quite funny. So I have the distinction of being one of the few people who've actually made Colbert laugh on stage.
Yep. And did he give you an award for that one?
Not entirely.
Not entirely. So with your answer is great, and to follow up with some of my thoughts on it, if the universe is 13.8 billion years old, and if the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and if humans evolved from primates about 6 million years ago, and if we planted food next to our homes, agriculture, about 10,000 years ago, and if 50 years ago we had Pong, little dot and two little sticks moving side to side, and now we have virtual realities that are almost completely indistinguishable from normal reality. They're getting there. We're getting there very quickly. So that's such a small period of time compared to the relative length of cosmic existence, but also the sheer vastness of cosmic existence. About every fifth star, 1 out of every 5 stars has an Earth-like planet in the habitable zone.
But we could be in a simulation. They could just be all the little pictures, right? Right?
You guys might not be able to see it, but Aubrey finishes that and he goes like this. He's moving his eyebrows. Or you think that it's simulated?
No.
Looking at through our telescopes?
Like I said, I don't know whether we're in a simulation. I think there are good arguments on both sides of that question.
Okay.
But
I'll finish the thought just a little bit further. So not only is it the time of the cosmos, but it's also the vastness of the cosmos. And taking those things into account is pointing us more and more in the direction of not being alone in the cosmos.
if we're not in a simulation.
Yes, and this is good, and the then likelihood of there being others in the cosmos then makes it likelier that we are in a simulation because it takes such a small period of time for a race to gain enough intelligence to be able to, and computing power from the star or power from quantum mechanics to be able to then simulate a reality. Are we following? Yeah? What about you guys? Okay, we got some hands and some hands. All right, we have an audience question. Let's go ahead and take it. All right, give me a quick second. There's a pen.
Lucky you got another pen, really.
In the context of you declaring this possibility of being a simulation, you're mentioning how much more real virtual reality has become. But that's only under the context of one person wearing the goggles. If we have...
Yes, yes. Thank you.
I think what Alan's saying by taking the microphone back is, yes, we get the idea. All right.
Wait, well, no, it's a very valid point. Very valid point. So just to answer that quick is, when we are placing, if you heard of solipsism? The idea that we can't trust that anything besides ourselves is actually real. So going off of that a little bit further, you don't know that something is real until you touch it. Therefore, or see it or whatever. Therefore, we don't know China exists right now. So the point is that only what needs to be simulated for that brain is just that brain and that brain's body. And then besides that, everything else only as they encounter it needs to be simulated. So it actually does not require as much computing power Was that along?
Well, the
No,
computing,
go ahead, Aubrey.
yeah, obviously the computing power aspect is irrelevant because, you know, we're not seeing any stopping point there. There's plenty of ways to get more computing power, and other civilizations that are only slightly more advanced than ourselves will have much more computing power and so on. So that's all kind of fine, you know. And of course, yeah, quite right that today's virtual reality is very primitive indeed compared to what we would need for any kind of world in which we could think that we were part of a simulation, unless we go in the solipsistic direction. But that doesn't take away at all from, I mean, it doesn't really prove that we're in a simulation or anything like that. And in fact, you know, where I thought you were going with all of this was the Fermi Paradox.
Of course, yeah. You
Right?
can talk about the Fermi Paradox.
But the Fermi Paradox has plenty of answers that don't involve us being in a simulation.
Like the Fermi filters.
Well,
Those are interesting.
right. So actually,
That means that there's potential filters that cause a civilization from being able to evolve to a point where they could then gain enough power to simulate, as in something like mutually assured destruction, nuking everyone, or potentially disease spreading, or asteroid collisions. There's plenty of those.
right. So by far my favourite of the various traditional answers to the Fermi Paradox is the cloaking one, that essentially,
I haven't heard of this one.
Okay, so plenty of civilizations may get to the point where they fuck themselves up
Oh
and
my
blow
gosh, they
themselves.
cloak themselves?
But the fact is, also, there are various civilizations that get to the point of figuring out how not to blow themselves up, but they also recognize that some other civilizations may be not very peaceful and may be wanting to go out and mess people up, right? And
Colonize with force.
for example, yeah, that's right. And the best way not to be colonized with force is not to be noticed. Now, of course, today we are aware that we are pumping out, you know, radio wave stuff that is rather indicative of our intelligence, rather fast, of our having radio transmitters at least, yeah. At the moment, but it's not obvious that we would necessarily need to be doing that. We could quite possibly get to a situation where we could do everything we wanted to do down here and the radio waves were not getting out. And if that were true, we might feel that we were safer from other civilizations. So one perfectly good explanation for the Fermi Paradox is that there are plenty of civilizations out there that have survived perfectly well for a nice long time, but they don't want anyone to know that they exist.
So we use the power of something like our star to then cloak our planet.
Well, it might not even need much power. I don't know really what
You
that
don't
means.
think so?
Well,
To
I mean,
cloak? So an alien civilization looks through a telescope at our Earth, and rather than seeing little tiny ants that are humans roaming on the Earth, they see barren land and
oh, well, remember, that's not quite how it's done, right? I'm not talking about cloaking the...
civilization.
I'm not talking about cloaking at the visual spectrum. I'm talking about cloaking at the level of the radiation that the planet emits into space that
Okay.
goes arbitrarily far out.
Correct, but then what about vision-wise?
Right, so you
Needs
can
cloaking as
imagine
well.
that, you know, some advanced civilization, if it got close enough, could have a look and, you know,
Correct, they
see
can
that
just
there was
fly
stuff
by
going
and
on.
see if it, yeah,
That's right, but they'd have to take the trouble to fly by, right?
on land.
Right,
Correct, yeah.
and the question is which of
They could
the
have
which of
cloaking themselves.
the very large number of planets that exist might they bother to fly by? And the answer is the ones that are emitting radio waves.
Got it, yeah. That would be easiest.
Yeah.
It's easiest to discover other species through the electromagnetic spectrum, and then furthermore, then you can put your telescopes on.
And I mean, the extension of what I'm saying that you put forward is perfectly reasonable. We might end up cloaking a bit more, you know, and doing the kind of thing you say. You know, there's nothing particularly difficult about that.
All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Does anyone have a thought about? Yeah, I see a hand that went up right here. Go ahead.
I had a question on a separate matter.
Uh-huh.
Is that okay?
We
can go.
How separate?
Why don't you give it? Why don't you give it?
On sort of the direct subject at which you were aimed.
Go.
So the project of stopping aging seems to be an extremely significant intellectual project, and I'm curious what you think the kind of scientific capacity necessary is to achieve that. So do you think that it is sufficient for sort of private sector efforts that are already aimed in this area? Do you think that we should have government programs incentivizing perhaps basic research in academia. Do you think that it even needs to go further than that we need to have some sort of national coordinated effort like the Manhattan Project? I would be interested,
Good question.
I would be interested in your general answer
Sure.
and also your comment on what's going on right now.
Okay, great, yeah. Yeah, sure, I'll try and give us a reasonably concise answer to that. It's going to be hard, actually, because it's a big
More
question.
funding across everywhere.
So, first thing I want to say is, I believe that we do basically know what needs to be done. I believe that this has overwhelmingly transitioned at this point from a scientific area in which the right thing to do is more discovery of, more understanding of stuff, to a technological area in which the right thing to do is to address these things like engineers and to try to build stuff from what we know already. Obviously that will entail finding stuff, selling more stuff out, as any pioneering technology always does, but it will be driven by a prior structure, a prior understanding of what's likely to be the general pathway towards success. I think that's where we are right now. So then what that means in terms of the the societal aspects that you mentioned is how hard is it? How expensive is it? All that kind of stuff. And for sure, right now, the news is not good, really. You know, we have far too little money. And of course, I mean, I'm talking locally. I am the chief science officer of a charity called Sense Research Foundation. We have
Strategies for engineered negligible senescence.
we only have $4 million a year. You know, that is pitiful. But the good news is that we only really need one more digit on that in order to have enough money. Well, shit. I mean, I mean, think about that. 40 million. I mean, how tiny is that compared to the kind of money that goes into
the military-industrial complex? There's so many parts of the budget.
or even medical research in one country. You know. Okay, that's the only. I believe that if we had just one more digit on top of our budget, then we would no longer have finances be the rate limiter.
Aubrey, why don't you give the audience just the analogy similar to how if we make constant tweaks on our body, same thing with a mechanical object, if you make constant repairs on it over time to potentially restore the body's homeostatic capacity to a 13-year-old as you age.
Yeah, well, so that's a rather different question. Let me kind of finish that question first.
Okay, but I think it's important to also address, though, the strategies themselves.
Sure, totally. I mean, I will explain in a minute why I say that we have really, to a good extent, transitioned from the discovery stage to the engineering stage. But yeah, in terms of where we are with the engineering, a lot of it is still at a very early stage. In other words, it's not in clinical trials or anything. It's just doing lab work, with cells and with mice and so on, which is not all that expensive. And that's why I can talk about these small numbers. And once those experiments get to a certain level of proof of concept, of course, the credibility increases, the money that's needed to go further, to go into clinical trials and so on is greater, but it's much easier to get that money because people understand that it might actually work.
What are you doing with cells? What are you doing with mice?
Right. So now I can answer that, the overall thing. So for those of you who don't know, about 17 years ago, I first put forward the idea that we might be able to address the problem of aging in a manner that had previously been kind of instinctively rejected by the scientific community. The scientific community understood very well that aging is caused by the progressive accumulation of damage in the body, molecular and cellular changes that accumulate and progress throughout time, and eventually that they get to a point where the body is not set up to tolerate them, and the overall physical and mental function that we have declines and eventually ceases entirely.
And in 3 words, metabolism causes
I'll come
pathology.
to that. Yeah, well, kind of, yeah, that's 3 words, I guess. So I know
it is 3 words. You taught me that.
I normally use 5 words because causes isn't one of them. You see.
What do you use?
I say metabolism causes damage, causes pathology. Right.
Metabolism causes damage, causes pathology.
Right.
5.
Right. And the key thing is
Can we follow that, by the way?
Metabolism causes damage throughout life, even starting before we're born, whereas damage only causes pathology late in life because the body is set up to tolerate a certain amount of damage before any pathology emerges. And that's really important. Yeah. What it means is that, on the one hand, you definitely don't want to be attacking the pathologies directly because it's going to inevitably become harder and harder to do that as the amount of damage you have, the thing that's causing the pathologies, increases. But also, it's really, really hard to clean up our metabolism and slow down the rate at which it creates damage because our metabolism is such a mess. You know, anyone here who writes software will understand very well that if you look at a metabolic chart, it's the ultimate catastrophe of uncommented spaghetti code. So it's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to tweak that to make it work better, more cleanly. But what you can do instead is neither of those things. Instead, you can go in and periodically repair the damage preventatively. In other words, before there's so much damage that it has already caused pathology. And if you're repairing it reasonably well, then you can keep its overall level down below the threshold that's bad for you, even without having doing anything about the rate at which the damage is being created in the first place.
As metabolism is causing damage, we come in and make interventions before it causes pathology. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? All right, yeah. Let's give it up to Aubrey.
The worst of it is, this is unbelievably obvious to any engineer. Right, this is what we already do to keep...
As the car is starting to go over some miles on the road, you want to intervene and add some new solid parts to it?
So a large part of the problem I had when I started putting these ideas across to my colleagues in the biology of aging was understanding how in Christ's name they could not get this. You know, it was one of the... I mean, of course, this is normal. You expect this whenever you have some kind of radical new way of looking at a problem, that the people who are familiar with the old way just, are really set in it. And it took a while, but we got there, after a decade or more. At this point, most people who work in the biology of aging have understood what I've been saying all this time well enough that it has become pretty much orthodox. People are even reinventing the idea and pretending it's original. It's good.
All right, we have a quick thought from the audience.
You were now fundraising for a sense, but you could only get any funds if you could promise that you'd reach escape velocity in aging with that money. How much would you ask for?
Well, okay, first of all, let me briefly explain what escape velocity is, because many people here won't know. This is a term that I also coined a long time ago now. Essentially, I noticed, and I pointed out I'm going to say probably 2004, that rejuvenation therapies, the things I'm talking about, damage repair therapies, buy time. If you can do reasonably comprehensive damage repair so that you can keep people healthy for maybe 20 or 30 years longer than they normally would be, then you've bought yourself all that time. You can apply those therapies to someone who's already, let's say, 60. In other words, they're not very far away from getting the pathologies of old age as a result of having too much damage. You can take them back in biological age, in other words, in the amount of damage that they're carrying, so that they won't have that same amount of damage again until they're, let's say, chronologically 90. Now, they will get that kind of damage at chronologically 90, even if you're using these therapies every week, simply because the therapies won't be perfect. But in those 30 years, we'll have had a chance to improve the therapies, to make them more comprehensive. Even though they were not 100% comprehensive initially, they still won't be, but they'll be closer to 100% comprehensive. So some of the damage that the first generation therapies didn't work on, the second generation will work on. So we will be able to re-rejuvenate the same people at the age of 90 when they're chronologically 60 for the second time. So they won't be chronologically 60 for the third time biologically 60 for the third time until they're chronologically 150 or whatever, right? So that's longevity escape velocity. Essentially, I define it as the minimum rate at which we need to improve the comprehensiveness of the therapies in order to stay one step ahead of the problem. All right, so the question was, how much would it cost to actually get there? Now, the reason the difficulty in answering that question is, whose money are we talking about? At this point, I'm the chief scientist and the founder of a charity that works on stuff that's so early stage that even most investors in Silicon Valley, regard it as too early, too uncertain.
Tell us what it's called.
It's called Sense Research Foundation. And the thing is, we do make progress with the relatively small number of dollars that we are able to attract. Over the time that we have existed, we've been able to push a number of our projects far enough along that we were able to spin them out into startup companies. We've done that 5 times now, and there's a couple more coming. And, that's what we want to do. First of all, because it demonstrates that we are actually making progress. Second of all, because it brings money in from sources that wouldn't otherwise do so. There's an awful lot of people in this place, and around the rest of the world for that matter, who are very supportive of this mission, verbally, and who, who have a lot of money, but who just don't like giving money away. And so they wait until there's an investment opportunity. Even if it's a very high risk, high reward investment opportunity, they wait for that. Now we can give them that. So that is making things better at this point. It is obviously still absolutely essential to maintain the foundation, the non-profit, as the engine room of all of that, the organisation that actually does the stuff that is still at too early a stage for even the most visionary investors to get involved. And that's why I spend my time, try my best to make that happen. But things are getting better. So the answer to your fundamental question is, that's the first step, and it's very small amounts of money. It's order of 8 digits per year. But then when we get the next step towards clinical trials, it's going to be billions per year, but that's going to be much easier to get. It won't be our money. It'll be the money of big pharma, the money of governments and so on. And then to get anywhere beyond that, to combine all these things together, which is ultimately the last step to get longevity, escape velocity, that will be the easy part. That will be the easiest of all, because we will be simply doing things, the regulatory part will pretty much be over by then. It'll really be just combining multiple things that are already individually approved.
But how much do you need now to reach the first tier?
Well, I mean, the thing is, as I said, you have to take it in multiple steps. So, I mean, the first step that I've tended to talk about is this thing, not longevity, escape velocity, but rather robust mouse rejuvenation. So I defined that a long time ago as taking middle-aged mice of a reasonably long-lived, healthy strain that would normally live to, let's say, 3 years without any intervention, do nothing whatsoever to them until they're already 2 years old. So they're definitely in middle age, they're 2/3 of the way through their life. Do a whole bunch of stuff to them then that gets them to live to 5 years on average rather than only 3. So those are the somewhat arbitrary numbers that I chose for my definition of
And
better.
that's the first pillar with hopefully $10+ million that needs.
I believe that we could get to that with the kind of money I was talking about earlier, the kind of $40 or $50 million per year. And when I started saying that 10 years ago or a little bit more, I said it was going to take about 10 years. And we're not there, believe it or not, but that's of course because we haven't had the 40 million a year.
Would we make those same changes in a human that we did to the mice?
Very much the same, yes. I mean, in fact,
what would those changes be?
well, we've got these 7 different major categories of damage that I always talk about. These are very big categories. They sound a little bit like so big that they wouldn't be useful, but they are useful. So one is loss of cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division of other cells. So, that happens in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places in the body during aging, and it causes problems, of course. But you might think, well, so it's such a broad category, why is it even useful to define it? The answer is because the repair strategy for all such cases is broadly the same. It's stem cell therapy. That's what you do, you pre-program your cells in the lab so that when you inject them into the body, they know what to do. They know how to divide and transform themselves into replacements for the cells that the body is not replacing on its own. And, of course, different stem cell therapies for different tissues are different, but they're only different in their details. They have a huge amount in common. So once you've got stem cell therapy working really well for one condition in one tissue, the amount of work that's involved to get it to work for the second one and the third one is far less. That's why it's useful to have this classification, this taxonomy.
And it's 7 strategies.
Yep.
Cool. Good questions from the audience. We do need to move forward and continue into a similar category.
You're not going to go for your bucket list?
I need to pick this one, and then we can go back to the bucket of questions. One more time?
What's the point of monogamy if this all is a simulation?
Well, I mean, one could say, what's the point of monogamy whether or not we're in a simulation? But hey, I'm an interesting case in point because I spent 18 years being monogamous and then 8 years being poly, and now I'm monogamous again. It's just like how it goes. Oh, and that was all by choice, by the way. It's not because everybody else, all but one people left me or anything.
Good question. All right, let us sound some fun out. All right, I'm going to pick this question because I think it's important to address it before the end of the evening. This question is, do you believe genetic engineering and neural prosthetics will exacerbate wealth inequality?
No, I don't. And the main reason I don't is because the main way in which genetic engineering and indeed neuroprostheses, but let's stick to genetic engineering because that's more in my space.
Exactly, let's do it.
Yeah. The main way in which those things will benefit anybody will be in relation to age-related problems. In other words, as a large component of the kind of work that we work on at SANS, as the development of ways to keep people useful in old age. And I believe that that entire corpus of medical interventions, as it comes online, is going to be viewed and treated by society very, very differently from the high-tech medicine that we see today. The high-tech medicine we see today, of course, does exhibit, if not exacerbate, a lot of inequality, simply because it's really expensive and
Like stem cell therapy, for example. If you want to prolong your life with stem cells, how much does it cost?
well, of course, it depends on the stem cell therapy, quite a lot. Yeah, it's not available to everybody by any means. In fact, it's not really a good example because hardly any stem cell therapies are actually approved yet anyway. But things that are approved but are still expensive, this applies.
What about
Here's
genetic engineering?
Wait a minute. Thing is that these therapies that are expensive and have only limited availability are overwhelmingly addressing one or another condition associated with aging, simply because, almost everything in medicine is overwhelmingly addressing aging, simply because we fixed everything else already, more or less. That means, pretty much by definition, it doesn't work, right? The best that you can get from anything that addresses an age-related condition today is a very modest postponement of the ill health that was going to happen anyway, which means that the economic arithmetic is crap. It means that basically you're going to be pumping a whole large amount of money into somebody to keep them a little bit healthier for a little bit longer, and then you're going to be spending the same amount of money that you were going to anyway to keep them alive in a declining state of health, and then they're going to die. So you've basically achieved nothing for your money except a very mild amount of, quality and quantity of life.
Okay, in this...
Whereas, if you had therapies that actually worked for aging, the situation would be completely different. Now, I'm not even talking here about the humanitarian imperative. I'm talking about pure, utterly mercenary economic logic. From that purely economic point of view, aging is ridiculously expensive. I mean, 90% of our medical care goes on aging. And that's, of course, just a direct cost. That's not even counting the lost productivity of the kids of the elderly who are looking after their parents, or the fact that the elderly are no longer contributing wealth to society because they're not well enough to do so. All that kind of stuff, right? So if we fix all that, then the country is just going to be vastly more prosperous. What that fundamentally can be stated as is these therapies will pay for themselves at the national level ridiculously many times over, ridiculously rapidly.
Correct.
And another way of saying it is, if one country decides to make these things available through taxation, irrespective of ability to pay, and another country does the opposite, then the country that does the opposite is going to be bankrupt extremely soon. Okay, so, I know this sounds very counterintuitive and alien to a US audience, because you guys grew up being, not really being terribly fond of this thing called taxation. But the fact is, you already have a precedent. It's just that the precedent is not high-tech medicine. The precedent is basic education. Now, I mean basic. Obviously, basic education is too basic. We know that. But the fact is, everybody gets it for free. And the reason why that is not a political football is simply because everybody ultimately understands that if you don't give your kids at least some basic education, then 20 years down the road, the country's going to be bankrupt because you're not going to be able to make anything or do anything. Go ahead.
So it seems like I would love to live for, whether it's 200 years, 300 years, 400 years. That would be great. But one of the issues that we're dealing with globally is the population is starting to change because we're having a massive impact on the ecosystem, right? And I'm not saying that it's in your wheelhouse to solve population problems, but what do you do with all the people now who are dead?
Who are not dead.
Yeah,
all these tedious, chronologically old people who are, who are irritatingly not dying. Right. Right. Speaking as someone who is in danger of being irritatingly not dying before you, my view is perfectly simple. I mean, and the thing is, this again is something that I've been saying since fucking forever, and nobody fucking remembers. Okay, so, I mean, look, it's very simple. Overpopulation is not a function of how many people we have on the planet. It's a function of the difference between how many people we have on the planet and how many people we can have on the planet with an acceptable level of environmental impact. Measured whatever way you like, climate change, whatever, right? And people just kind of completely forget that second number is not a constant. It's not like you know, the speed of light. It's not something that's a universal physical, like, immutable. It changes as a result of other technologies. Hello, boys and girls. And these are technologies that are being developed in this town. You know, solar energy, you know, artificial meat, you know, desalination. These are the things that are going to increase the carrying capacity of the planet. And if you even slightly think about it, it is completely fucking obvious that these things are going to increase the carrying capacity of the planet far faster than the population of the planet could possibly increase, even if we completely eliminated all death from all causes now. So.
All right, yeah, Aubrey.
You can probably tell I've said this before.
Well said. All right, I know we have lots of audience thoughts that we want to engage with. Aubrey, speak about genetic engineering from an intelligence perspective. Speak about it from making intelligence edits or metabolism edits, as in how will that not increase and exacerbate wealth inequality?
Well, again, it depends why we do it. You know, this is kind of related to the age-old question of therapy versus enhancement. You know, what is the difference between therapy and enhancement? At the end of the day, it's a question of how much we believe that we ought to have such a thing. You know, and that comes because you see, that comes from how much we observe that some people already have the thing. So, for example, young adults today, tend not to have Alzheimer's disease. Therefore, we regard anything that stops old people from getting Alzheimer's disease as a therapy. Young people today do not have wings. Therefore, we regard giving people of any age wings as an enhancement, right? You know, simple as that, really. Now, the thing is, both of these things could, in principle, be achieved by genetic engineering, right? So you can't just say, genetic engineering, is it going to increase inequality or not? Because it depends on how it's used, what it's used for, and how we think about the thing that we're thinking of using it for.
Correct. And so in the case of wanting to amplify our child's intelligence or our child's metabolism, and that edit costing $100,000, where do we go from there?
Well, yeah, I mean, so, you know, okay, so first of all, we're not really faced with these questions because we haven't the faintest idea how to increase people's intelligence with genetic engineering anyway. But supposing we did, supposing we figured out...
Well, how about adding to our working memory?
Well, okay, let's use that as a fine example. I mean, even that is actually way away from what we know how to do with genetic engineering. But supposing we could, okay? Then, well, is it like, I mean, is it something that we should be doing to kids, or is it something that we should wait for kids to decide whether to do themselves? You know, this is the case. That kind of thing is, you know, should we teach kids to be religious? Or should we give up...
Should we circumcise them?
Or should we give them bigger cocks? Or whatever.
All right, let's go to our...
You want me to do this, right? Okay, what we got? What the fuck's it? Okay. Do you believe there is a difference between life and not life? Did I really choose this one? All right.
Is there a difference between not life and not life?
Well, certainly there is no difference when it comes to aging. The aging of
The simulation, humanity's most thought-provoking questions in relation to aging.
Aging of machines that we unequivocally and universally view as alive, such as ourselves, is at the fundamental level indistinguishable from aging of machines that we universally view as not alive, like cars. Of course, the details are different because the details of the structure and composition of these different machines is different. But that's true between different machines that are not living or different machines that are living. So whether it's alive or not is, again, not a distinction. It's very, very important to understand that aging is a phenomenon of physics and not a phenomenon of biology, because that's the first step in demystifying it, getting people to understand that it's not this enigma that we have to just kind of live with.
Aging is a matter of physics, not biology?
Yeah.
Is it not both?
Biological machines live in the physical universe, so obviously that means that anything that's a phenomenon of biology is also a phenomenon of physics.
Okay.
But the point is that things that are phenomena of physics might be viewed as not really fully explaining phenomena of biology. The biology would be some kind of emergent phenomenon, and the question is aging one of those things? And the answer is no. Aging is fundamentally a simple thing that's easily understood and is fundamentally the same for non-living machines as it is for living machines.
And is there then a line between life and not life? Or do you call certain things without life?
So of course this is an age-old question, and people have, it really ultimately comes down, as so many philosophical questions do, to a matter of definition. People can perfectly well make perfectly good, parsimonious definitions of life that say that viruses are alive, and people can also make equally parsimonious ones that say that viruses are not alive. And I don't give a damn. The fact is, I'm a practical guy. I don't care about philosophy, I care about suffering.
Correct, and eradicating that suffering.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But also the philosophy around these things is crucially important to the progress of the world.
No.
It's not.
No.
You don't-
The understanding that the philosophy of these things is not crucially important to the world is crucially important to the world.
Okay, so correct. The execution of these things into the world is crucially important, right?
Got it.
Okay, so executing it into the world is important, but if there is not conversation being had amongst people about how it's going to impact the world, then you have...
That's not philosophy,
then-
that's
How is that not
sociology. That's
philosophy?
sociology and politics and stuff like that.
It,
So philosophy,
Okay.
the so-called ethics of all of this type of stuff is that the things that come under that category are things like the question, the assertion that death gives meaning to life, other bullshit of that nature, right? Whereas questions like, where will we put all the people, that's not a philosophical question, that's a sociological question.
Okay, but then there are philosophical questions related to these technologies around, for example, genetic engineering and neuroprosthetics. I think this is, in a sense, a philosophical question.
Well,
So again,
as I said, genetic engineering can be, the merits of it can be a philosophical question, but not in toto. You can only answer those
On one
questions
end,
if
you
you look
are
at how you're
executing
going to
the
use
world.
them and how you could use them. So,
Exactly,
insofar
yeah,
as
yeah.
they are being
Because we should
used,
discuss it.
insofar as a particular technology is being used for therapeutic purposes, for purposes which nobody disputes are purely therapeutic rather than enhancement or anything like that, and furthermore, purposes which are going to be with high probability available to everybody, the so-called ethical questions that might surround such applications of such a technology just disappear. Whereas if the same technology is proposed to be used for other purposes, like, for example, giving people wings or gills or whatever, right? And this is not perceived as an essential human right and not made available to everybody because society doesn't vote for it, right? Then you could say, well, okay, that's a different ethical question.
All right, Aubrey. I will agree with you, and I will also want to talk about this more as well over time. Very good. So that was about what was the last one about? Life, not
I
life.
have no idea.
It was life, not life.
There's a guy over there in the blue shirt who's really desperate to ask a question. Can I let him do so?
All right, yeah, let's have him. Yeah, go ahead.
So
Go.
there's a concern that the same biological innovation necessary to reach escape velocity will also greatly increase the risk from biological weapons, basically malicious use of biology. Like, this is something that people are actively developing, militaries have incentive to develop it. Are you concerned about that?
I am.
And is that not philosophy?
No, it's sociology. Again,
How is sociology not philosophy in that case just regularly intertwined? In that specific scenario,
The point is
making a biological weapon?
okay,
with
so
it?
so the things that I view as ethics rather than sociology are things that are not tied to the real world. So when Leon Kass, I think he was the first person to say it, says death gives meaning to life, there's nothing to tie it to. It's an assertion. What the fuck? How can one actually argue that question? It lives in a vacuum. Whereas a question about overpopulation or weaponry or whatever, this is a question. The question changes depending on what you can do. So my answer to the overpopulation question, as you've heard, which some people mistakenly call an ethical question, is a technological answer, right? I say, hello, we're not going to have this problem because we've got all these other technologies that are going to increase the carrying capacity of the planet. So it's suddenly, miraculously, no longer an ethical question, which to me means it never was an ethical question. Now, the same applies here. I take the view that people are overly afraid of the unknown and afraid of new technologies, but only to a point. I believe that people overuse the precedent of nuclear weapons as a warning against developing new technology and saying it might be better not to develop such and such a thing. Because really, to my mind, the only way that any new technology can be a bad idea to develop is if it fulfills three criteria. Number one, well, actually, I'll state them in one sentence. The criteria are basically that the technology has to be something that can be used by a small number of people to do a large amount of damage in a very small amount of time. If any one of those three things is not the case, then you basically don't have a problem. The society can control the use of the misuse of the technology. Now, biological weapons fall very much, at least potentially, under the same category as nuclear weapons.
What would be a good use of a biological weapon or a nuclear weapon?
Oh, of course, it's not the weapons, but I mean, in the same cases, nuclear weapons are bad, but nuclear power might be good, right? So in this case, similarly,
Absolutely,
right.
absolutely.
So
But then
I think
why
that was
ever make a nuclear weapon?
Oh, exactly. That was kind of a bad thing, right? I mean, of course, we did it because we wanted to defeat Japan or whatever it was. But yeah, so for biological weapons, absolutely, especially today when things are so much cheaper and easier to get, it's a big problem. But the point is, it's a big problem anyway. You don't have to have the additional motivation of developing such and such a technology that comes from the wish to defeat aging in order to have that problem. So the only way to address that problem is to, have close monitoring and so on, of access to this or that, stuff. Anyway, that stuff is being developed, whatever. Yep.
All right, let's take someone from the audience. Let's go here. All right, grab a question.
Dr. Jones.
Go ahead and give it a read.
Do you believe that anthropogenic global warming is causing catastrophic climate change?
I think it will be good fun for me to tweet the fact that Rhys Jones asked me the question. That would be entertaining indeed.
So again, the question is, do you believe anthropogenic global warming is causing catastrophic climate change? Aubrey?
Well, of course it bloody is. But the question is
Are
what we
humans
are focusing on.
causing
So here's a problem that I've had with the climate change people over the years. People who have been trying to make a big noise about climate change and trying to fix it, to my mind, they haven't really been terribly efficient and effective about pinpointing the thing they need to be focusing on. The focus has so much been on the fact that it was our fault, that we did it, the fact that climate change is happening and it's as a result of what we're doing. Who gives a damn whether we did it? What matters is that it's bad for us now and we need to fix it. Even if we didn't do it, we should still fix it. Hello. And it turns out that stopping doing what we have been doing is not actually going to contribute very well to fixing the problem. What we really need is totally new technology for carbon sequestration and such like that will fix the problem. And if we get really good at that kind of stuff, then we can carry on doing the so-called bad stuff that we were doing before. It won't even matter. And I've had the most extraordinarily incomprehensible level of incomprehension from climate change people when I've tried to point this out.
Aubrey, have we measured enough variables to determine that catastrophic climate change is occurring to the planet?
Of course we bloody have.
We have. Okay, so how Have we measured the proximity of the star to the Earth? Have we measured the amount of sun flares on the Earth?
What the hell's that got to do with it?
Increasing temperature?
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah, right, yeah. I know there's a whole bunch of stupid, did we land on the moon kind of arguments that say that say there's some doubt about this, but the bleeding obviously isn't. There may be doubts about at the second order, whether it's speeding up, how rapidly it's reaching some kind of catastrophic point. And obviously people are finding out things all the time about exactly the dynamics of ice shelves in the Antarctic and such like that are helping us to predict things better.
For a reason. There's a reason why is it human caused? Is it not cyclical? Is it not cyclical?
And this is what,
evolution?
and this again is what I say. Who gives a fuck? The fact is, even if there is some merit to these questions as to the extent to which the climate change we're seeing is anthropogenic, we've still got to bloody fix the thing if we don't want to drown.
Yes, the solar energy, nuclear energy.
No, carbon sequestration. That's what we've got to do. We've got to.
Good, yes.
It's not just good. It's damage repair, for fuck's sake.
It's either pulling it directly out. It's planting trees. There's different ways to do it.
That is carbon sequestration. Yes.
So all right. I'm going to go ahead and pick the next question. The next question is: do you believe artificial general intelligence poses an existential threat to humanity?
How did you know that was the next question? By the way, did you pull the thing out of the bucket in your head?
No, I just picked it because I want to make sure to hit it.
All right, what was the question again?
Do you believe artificial general intelligence poses an existential threat to
Right, so I have a slightly controversial view on this. Some of you probably know that I used to work in artificial intelligence before I was a biologist. I did that. I worked in software verification for 6 or 7 years. And I've had the good fortune to be good friends with quite a lot of the pioneers in artificial intelligence, especially these days. I've known Demis Hassabis, the head of DeepMind, since he was an undergrad, and he's definitely one of my big heroes right now. But yeah, so do I think it poses a risk? I do, but I think the risk is probably rather low. But I want to preface my explanation for that with an absolutely huge caveat. This is 100% out of my arse intuition. It's absolutely not based on any kind of real evidence-based rationale. I just think that the thing that people are most scared about, which is recursive self-improvement, where machines get to a point of sufficient autonomy and sufficient self-comprehension, sufficient understanding of their own workings that they can improve themselves without human intervention or despite human intervention. I think that may genuinely be impossible in practical terms because it's too I/O bound. In other words,
impossible to achieve that?
Yes.
Why?
Because it may be too I/O bound. In other words,
what is I/O bound?
Input-output bound. What that means in computer, the computer people here will understand what that means. But so what that means is simply the amount of interaction, the amount of data transfer between the machine that's doing the improving and its environment has to be too great. The amount of that data transfer has to will limit the rate at which the thing can improve. It can determine whether it is improving itself and therefore how to improve itself. So if you look at, for example, recent advances...
The amounts of inputs is exceeding what it can do to...
That's right. Basically, there's only so many experiments that the machine can do in a certain amount of time.
It can also
so if we look
optimize itself.
Yes, but only as a result of the data.
To maximize the
No, well, yes.
As a result of the data.
But yes, sure, it can make its data... It can make its choice of what experiment to do more efficient, but that reaches diminishing returns. That's my intuition. So we don't see that when we look at DeepMind, AlphaGo's ability to teach itself how to play Go, because there's no I/O needed. It's purely thinking. It's purely playing something against itself, something in a purely formal system where the rules are just mathematics.
Is there an existential threat when the artificial intelligence leaders of the United States and the artificial intelligence leaders of China are attempting to maximize their economic success?
Oh, sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's plenty of danger from the advances of artificial intelligence technology in general, whether you call it AGI or not, being, you know, lumpy, being non-uniformly distributed, and being misused by that person. But that's a whole smaller problem than the hypothetical problem of recursive self-improvement.
So hypothetically, recursive self-improvement exists and works throughout society.
If it did, then I think we would have a very big problem. But I don't. I have my gut feeling is that it's never going to be a problem because it just can't be done.
And as a global leader, what do you think about artificial intelligence becoming how do we avoid it becoming a problem? What are some of the solutions along the way?
So if we leave recursive self-improvement out of it and we just look at what things that I do think can be done, right? Then I think there is nothing special about it that distinguishes it from other aspects of technological progress. Yes, it needs to be monitored, it needs to be developed responsibly and disseminated responsibly, just like any other new technology, in order to have the best benefits for humanity. But I don't think there's anything special about it.
Yes, it's important to develop, is it true, any new technology responsibly?
To develop it as fast as possible, because ultimately...
That's the execution side of things.
So ultimately, technologies are, they give people more choice, more options, and therefore more potential for quality and quantity of life. But dissemination responsibly, and effectively and safely,
Right.
giving people, having the right, respecting society's opinion as to risk-benefit ratios, things like that.
And you call that sociological, and I call that philosophical, but
It'd be called political as well, but it's definitely not
Correct.
philosophy. It's definitely not ethics.
it's definitely not ethics.
That's right.
It's not ethics when you talk about building an artificial intelligence. There's no ethics as you're executing this into the world. What are these discussions then? They're sociological discussions. They're not ethical at that point.
Basically, that's true, yes. I think that at the end of the day, when you can reduce a so-called ethical question to a technological and sociological question, a question of how the specific concrete circumstances in which the availability of this or that technology would be good, and the circumstances in which it would not be good, then it's no longer an ethical question. It's a sociological question and a technological one.
Okay, so the good or not good, the good or bad, that is a sociological, it is not a philosophical.
I say so, yeah. I think that philosophical questions are ones that are not tied to reality.
You think so?
Again, I give
Is
the
that part of
example. I give the example of Cass's statement: "Death gives meaning to life." How the hell are we supposed to evaluate the truth or falsity of that statement? That is ethics to me.
Okay, so the only questions like that do you consider philosophical or
Correct.
ethical? Okay, all right. Let's go ahead and have you pull.
I have a green one. Haven't had a green one yet. I've got two here. Hang on.
All right, pull the first one. The one
All
at the
right.
top, the one that
Do you believe that this is a very tedious question. Do you believe that human immortality is feasible? Okay, so I guess I'm going to have to bloody have a bit of a rant about the word immortality.
All right, let's hear it. What is
Somebody is holding up his hand as if to say we only have 5 minutes left. Is that what you say?
No, I want to ask you a question.
Well, all right, let me do the bloody immortality nonsense first. All right, so never, ever, ever, when you're trying to persuade someone that they might be a little bit overly fatalistic about aging, never, ever let the word immortality enter the conversation.
Why?
If anybody says
Why?
to you, "Ooh, I don't want to live forever," the first thing you need to say is, "Fucking hell, we're not talking about living forever. We're talking about not getting Alzheimer's disease, boys
Yes.
and girls."
Woo!
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Everything that you have ever seen written about me in the mainstream media that focuses on me being called the prophet of immortality, or even talking about living forever, or even longevity at all, is a misrepresentation that is done purely to sell papers. I can't stop people doing it. It's their job to sell papers, and at the end of the day, it's better for me to get publicity of some kind than no publicity at all, so I've got to do it. But the fact is, it's a misrepresentation. We don't work on that. I don't work on that. I've never worked on that. I've never believed that it makes sense to think about the idea of immortality at all, let alone, or even the idea of longevity as a goal for its own sake. I have always believed that the right thing to be thinking about is keeping people healthy, because nobody wants to be sick, and it just happens that not being sick has this side effect that you're more likely to wake up tomorrow morning if you're not sick today.
Yeah. We know how it feels when we're sick. It feels like misery. And living healthy and happy feels incredible. Good. Okay, so immortality is not the right way to talk about it. There's a better way to talk about it.
Sure, okay, so I could answer the question, do I believe that an indefinite, youthful life is feasible? In other words, do I believe that we can get into a state where we do not inexorably become sicker on average the longer ago we were born? And absolutely I believe that we are almost there. I believe that within the next couple of decades we have a very good chance, at least a 50-50 chance, of achieving that goal.
Great. All right, we will have a little bit of Q&A at the end. I want to just touch on a couple more thoughts. Next question, do you believe universal basic income can sustain a post-work world?
It's an interesting concept. I mean, I believe that the concept of universal basic income as it's currently described is probably only a first step, a very kind of, blunt instrument in terms of how we can structure a society that is not built around the concept of the ideal of full employment. And I certainly do believe that the rate at which automation is coming is such that there is no way in hell that we will be able to pull the rabbit out of the hat in terms of full employment that we did last time round, by inventing this enormous service sector to take up the slack from the loss of jobs in manufacturing and agriculture. At the end of the day, what is the left? It's basically the entertainment industry. How many, footballers and singers do you need?
Not even anymore, because music is able to be automated by artificial intelligence.
Right. Whether.
So would comedy.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, I believe that there's a bunch of truth in the idea that people will continue to pay for things where it is precisely the fact that it's another person doing it that they're paying for.
Do you think people would pay more for a doctor that's an AI?
Not a doctor, no, that's not one of the examples.
But
a comedian, quite possibly.
What about a musician that's an AI?
I think they would pay less. I think they would actually prefer a musician that they feel they have some kind of entity with. That's my point. I think so. There will still be money in the entertainment industry, but you only need so many of them. And so I can certainly conceive of a future not very far away, a couple of decades, in which work as a whole, as in stuff that you get paid to do that you wouldn't do otherwise, can become something that we could compare with conscription. Something that young adults are forced to do for a short while, as part of their education or as part of their contribution to society, and once they're done, they never have to do it again, and everything's free. I think that's a very realistic scenario, not very far into. All I feel I can do is to draw the broad strokes of how we should be thinking about these questions, how we should be, juxtaposing different inputs, different new data that we have.
All right, and that was universal basic income, good. And let's touch on, because I want to open up for questions at the end. Let's do colonizing Mars. Aubrey,
right.
Should we colonize Mars globally or nationally?
I don't give a damn. Mars is an unpleasant place. I mean, honestly, I'm reminded of.
You don't want to prevent the light of consciousness from going extinct?
I'm all for that. I mean, I'm not.
So Mars isn't that bad of a place.
Hang on. I'm not the kind of existential risk type who says that, it's absolutely pivotal that we should maintain the species at all costs in one way or another. I tend to be the kind of person who thinks that almost everybody dying is almost as bad as everybody dying. But nevertheless, I'm all for not everybody dying, and so absolutely it would be nice to have off-planet civilizations. But I wouldn't try Mars. I would build a much more controlled environment.
Would you go into space, like the International Space Station?
Space, yes, but that kind of thing. Yeah, perhaps further away than the ISS.
You would
but
make millions of habitable...
oh, no, the point is you don't
space.
need millions in order to preserve the species. You only need a few, right? And
So you'd want to throw up 100,000 in there, and then just in case if something was to happen on the planet, then...
yeah, I mean, there's 100. I'm sure we can find 100,000 people who are fucked up enough to want to live in space, right? So, one hears that Musk is finding a fair number of people who are perfectly happy to go to Mars and never come back, right?
We have the full intentions of wanting to come back and building systems that enable us to come back.
Well, quite. But the point is, this question often gets melded, wrongly in my view, with the question of mass immigration as an approach to the overpopulation problem that we discussed earlier.
Wait, Aubrey, you've pushed an agenda of Mars sucking onto us, okay?
Yeah, sure.
All right, well, now how about the slow and steady terraformation of Mars over time and then all the people that you call stupid would stay on Earth. There you go, and you can go to Mars with all the smart people.
I'll stay on Earth with all the smart people.
And all the stupid people will go to Mars.
Yeah.
Okay, what about that positive vision? And furthermore, back to the question specifically, Aubrey, do you believe in the national progress of going and building space stations and going to the moon and stuff like that, or do you believe in it being a more global effort?
Well, of course, at the moment it's increasingly neither, right? It's increasingly a private sector thing. I don't see any problem with that.
Yeah, it's fostering a lot of innovation, definitely is. And I want to piggyback on this question with a new question. It's not on this list, but the question is, do you believe in world peace?
Oh no, I think war is great. I mean, fuck, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Do I think that world peace is possible? Well, actually I said something about this more than a decade ago when I spoke at TED. I decided, well, okay, I'm speaking to this bunch of people who have a high opinion of their ability to influence the world, and in many cases that opinion is justified. And what we want to do is what I want to do is kind of capitalize on that can-do attitude and get people to really get motivated. And what I chose to do in my TED talk was, and this is, by the way, in case you're going to be confused, this is not the same talk that's on TED.com. The talk on TED.com is one I gave at TED Global in 2005. I'm talking about the talk I gave in 2006 at the real TED. Basically I said, listen, if we actually crack this, if we bring aging under proper control, it's not just that we're going to not have people with Alzheimer's disease. I mean, that's awfully wonderful, but the fact is, it's also going to help us to see that we have, as a species, the ability to address and to really succeed in addressing extremely hard problems. And I use world peace as one of my examples. I think I probably use climate change as well. I think I maybe even use earthquakes. I said, maybe we can actually stop earthquakes. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Hurricanes, fires.
Or we can have it only rain at night. I mean, wouldn't that be fucking wonderful?
A lot of people like rain during the day.
but they can go to Mars.
Okay, so you want to use aging as a good example for people to say,
an empowerment thing.
We can work together.
An empowerment thing, that's right. Well, not just we can work together, but that we can work together with to actually achieve something that we have spent our entire history throughout civilization believing was impossible. And world peace is a fine example of that.
It is. I totally agree. That's a good empowerment statement, is to fix something like aging and work our way up to something like world peace. All right, let's do...
And then we can go for what women like and dislike about each other.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. All right, let's rapid fire some stuff. I want to mess around with this and rapid fire a bit. All right, quick rapid fire is... do you believe nuclear fusion can be an energy source for civilization?
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's a really exciting area.
This was rapid fire. All right. Do you believe in clean meat? Is it feasible?
You mean artificial meat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, we were the first people to invest in Organovo, the tissue printing company, the organ printing company, which of course spun out the world's leading artificial meat company, Modern Meadow.
And next is, do you believe, you can have a sentence for this one, that the government regulations put too much restriction on innovation?
Not exactly on innovation, but on the dissemination of innovation. And I think that there's definitely an argument that the risk aversion of society contaminates the development of new technologies and the dissemination of those access to those technologies too much.
All right, do you believe that intermittent fasting can prolong life?
Not appreciably.
Straight no?
Not appreciably. Maybe
Not
a little bit for some people, but not enough to be of much interest to me.
Okay, and do you believe consciousness is localized in the human nervous system?
I have no idea.
What,
And also,
yes.
I don't give a damn, because the fact is, it works. You know, the body is the thing that stops working, and the consciousness works fine until the body doesn't.
All right, and then let's do questions from our audience. All right, let's see. All right, but we had a hand here. I want to take this one.
Have you thought about the possibility that asking for $40 to $50 million for biological extension might be short-sighted, given $40 to $50 billion could solve the merging with machines and extending consciousness, teaching people to code, and therefore code themselves, versus, which might be a possible stopgap, the biological constant to keep people alive long enough to learn how to code themselves. Have you thought about the utility of $40 to $50 million on something where 40 to 50 billion, which exists?
Okay, so when I'm feeling ornery and I hear a question that starts with, have you thought of this? I generally answer the question by saying yes and shutting up. But today I'm feeling charitable, so I won't say that. All right, so yeah, so the answer is basically, we never know which technological approach is going to solve a given acknowledged problem the most quickly. And I mean, even within the universe of biomedical, of purely wet solutions to the problems of aging, we at Sense Research Foundation are as diverse as we can be. We pursue alternative ways to do this or that thing. So I am 100% in favor of that same diversity at a wider level, where we just basically say, you know, people ought to be working on uploading as well as working on, you know, the wet version of what we're doing. My personal opinion has been and remains that at this point, the wet work is going better, and we're going to get to longevity escape velocity more rapidly with that than we will with anything that involves transfer of our consciousness to a more robust hardware. But I completely acknowledge, as I always have, that I could be wrong about that. And I greatly applaud the pursuit of the alternative approaches and, of course, the funding of those approaches. And it's nice that the people who tend to be interested in these various approaches tend to overlap.
All right, over here we go.
Hi, Aubrey, I had a question. I wanted to know what you think about the right way to present unconventional ideas, because you clearly have unconventional ideas. I imagine that if I had an unconventional idea I wanted to promote, I might think the best way to do it is to have a very conventional style, because then people would think, well, he's not crazy, he's very conventional, he's wearing a suit, he looks normal, I should listen to this idea. But you obviously have a dramatically unconventional style. You have this amazing hair, you're a very emphatic speaker.
You're very kind. My wife likes it too.
That presents the danger that someone will say, well, I can't believe his idea because look at his hair.
Yeah.
And that's very unfair, but
Right.
some people think that
So-
way. So I'm wondering how you think about right way to express unconventional ideas.
Very important question. And of course, it's not just a question for, you know, why do I do the things the way I do? It's also a question for all of you here, because I have a perception that this is a fairly sympathetic audience. Many of you may want advice about how you can be better advocates, but make more of a difference yourselves in that regard. So, yes, very important. Actually, you know, I occasionally give a talk called How to Be a Successful Heretic, which addresses some of this. You can probably find it online. I think there's a version of it online. Long and short of it, well, let me rather than try to go through all of the things I say in that talk, what I'll do is just specifically address the question you asked about what are the pros and cons about looking and appearing unconventional. And that is actually a rather subtler question than one might think. There are definitely downsides for looking unconventional of the sort that you just described. However, there are also upsides. There's one upside which is kind of generic, irrespective of the cause that one is pursuing, which is that it's very important to be memorable.
Uniqueness.
It's important to stick in someone's mind so that they, the next time they see you in the media, they kind of remember what they saw, and they kind of you get a better accumulation of appreciation of what was said. But another thing which is very much specific to the anti-aging world is that I have to contend with the fact that there is already an enormous history of millennia of snake oil in this area, of people saying that they know how to fix aging already and not being correct. And of course these days there is very clearly an extremely large thing called the anti-aging industry, which is entirely based on products that fundamentally don't work. So it's extremely important for me to make it very clear at the very first impression to my audience that I'm not one of those, that I'm not in this in any way for personal financial gain. And wearing a suit is the wrong way to do that. No, seriously.
What about the actual strategies of dissemination of topics that are kind of radical that you want to change the world with? Any recommendations for that, similar to what you did with aging?
So that kind of does come back to the kind of whole slew of things that I said in this How to Be a Successful Heretic talk. Essentially, basically what I said was, my first one was, be right. I think I said something like diligence before oratory. Sean Carroll, famous physicist, wrote a wonderful thing probably 15 years ago along those lines, saying almost all heretics are actually heretics for a good reason. They're fucked up. They're just not being careful. They're wrong, right? So if you actually have a good idea that's really radical, the odds are against you, and everybody knows it. Be charismatic, be funny, be everywhere. Go out and actually talk to people. All the obvious things that I do. And be memorable. Yeah.
All right, good. And let's go here.
You've stated that it's practically difficult to adjudicate the validity of truth claims like Leon Cass's, but do you think that you can provide an argument in principle as to why a discipline like political philosophy, moral philosophy, metaphysics, aesthetics, why these are just impossible in principle?
Sorry, I missed the end of that. Why metaphysics what?
Why metaphysics or moral philosophy are impossible in principle, because it seems that these philosophical questions do stand if one isn't able to rule them out on materialistic grounds.
Okay. So, no, I think perhaps I wasn't clear. I'm not saying that questions like, assertions like death gives meaning to life, or, consciousness exists, or consciousness is in the brain, or whatever. I'm not saying that those are invalid questions. I'm saying that they are a different category of question from questions like, well, we put all the people. Or,
because they're not execution-driven.
They're not grounded in experiments that we can do. It's like, does God exist? Things like that. All of those kinds of questions, these are essentially outside of the realm of scientific and technological exploration.
Can you give examples of those questions again?
Well, all the ones I just said, like, does death give meaning to life or not? Does God exist? Does consciousness exist in the brain or not? These things
that last one can't be proven?
I believe that's true, yeah. I believe that the definition of consciousness...
I would disagree. I think that's similar to thinking that humans can't fly 200, 300 years ago.
Okay, so my way of thinking about it is this. I say, well, okay, consciousness is this thing which is inherently an experience that we have. You could call it our sixth sense. We experience our own thoughts in the same way that we experience sights and sounds and smells, right? Now, where do those things come from? Who the fuck knows? I mean, in the same way that we can't know whether we're in a simulation, we can't know whether we can't falsify solipsism, Similarly, we can't say where that sixth sensory input comes from. So, it's a ridiculous question. I mean, it's not a ridiculous question, but it's a ridiculous idea that we would be able to answer that question by scientific experimentation or observation.
Well, the claim would be that these questions are going to be architectonic, that if one wants to improve something, one has to know that one is actually improving it.
No, one has to know that people, including oneself, are going, and especially oneself, are going to think that one has improved it. That's a very different thing. So, I know a lot of people in the effective altruism community, for example, and they, first of all, there's a whole bunch of, foundational questions about whether utilitarianism is the right way to measure merit, things like that. And I haven't the faintest idea. I mean, that's very much a philosophical question. I say, you can't answer that by experiment. It's just a choice, right? Of course, one could.
What can't be answered by?
Whether
experiment?
utilitarianism is correct.
But some choices are going to be more choice-worthy than others, and there are rational reasons for believing that.
Hang on, choices are going to be more choice-worthy. I don't understand that. What do you mean?
One can take a number of given actions, and there are principled reasons you can present for why a given action is better than another. And in the classical political philosophical tradition, one might get to the true natures of things, if there is such a truth that can't be known.
Yes, but that's basically a hierarchy. You can say,
What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different kind of thing.
And that can
Argumentation
drive
and
science and
experimentation are
technology.
very different processes. Argumentation involves basically maths. It involves, in the abstract, saying, okay, if we assume this and we assume that, then we can infer the other. And some such inferences are not obvious, and that's why philosophy is an actual field, right? That makes perfect sense. I'm fine with that, right? But that's no different from saying, okay, it depends what choices of axioms of set theory you use. You can prove different things depending on whether you like the axiom of choice or not, things like that, right? So I'm entirely fine with that. But that's an entirely different thing from what I actually care about. I don't give a flying fuck whether the axiom of choice is true. I actually care about whether I'm going to get Alzheimer's.
Just finally, isn't that going to be upstream of the questions that you do care about?
No.
So we'll have this conversation later. I want to pass the mic. Last question, yes, in the very back.
Assuming we're in a simulation, how do we hack our way out of it?
We can't.
Hold on. Thank you. Okay, Aubrey, that's not sufficient answer. So.
Who the fuck are you to tell me what's... You're buying my next beer for that.
Deal. So, okay, to understand one is in a simulation, what would need to happen?
Well, okay, first of all, to understand whether one is in a simulation, that's something that very much it falls into, to my mind, the category of philosophy. In other words, at this point, we have no way even to go about the question of designing an experiment that would answer the question. Now, I will say that I don't think that's a watertight answer, that it's conceivable to me that we might come up with an actual solid argument that would say that this particular observation would demonstrate very persuasively indeed that yes, we are in simulation, or conversely, we're not. But, people who have thought about this a lot, for a living, like Nick Bostrom, the best they've been able to do, and it's very good, but the best they've been able to do is to come up with a very weak kind of thing that says, if such and such a thing is true, and then we're in simulation, if it's not, then we're not. They definitely haven't given us a decision path, a path to actually coming to a conclusion. And therefore, I would be awfully surprised if we ever do find such a path to coming to that conclusion from observation.
Correct, and if there are certain ways to make progress on that path to coming up with an answer of whether we are in simulation, then we could do scientific experiments in order to figure that out.
Right, everything in science ultimately involves, so at the bottom line, everything involves an alternation between hypothesis formation and hypothesis testing. But that means that you have to have some way into that alternation process, right? So you have to have, if you can't figure out what the first experiment is to do to even get anywhere.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then maybe at one point you can hack your way out of that simulation using some sort of technology or science, who knows?
I'll shut up now.
All right, I'll shut up too. All right, so I want to thank everyone for coming out for the simulation. Thank you all.